About the Clergy Retirement Security Program is the formula that I'm about to show you. I thought it was this slide, but it's coming up. The formula involves multiplying years starting in 2007 times a bunch of numbers. But the year is assuming that somebody's appointed full-time. So in our denomination, when we have people appointed three-quarter time and half-time, you still get that year of credit, but it has to be multiplied times the fraction that you're under appointment. So just for example, we've got a whole bunch of lines on it. I'm not sure how much more helpful it is to see a whole bunch of variety. None of you have a service record that looks this crazy, going in and out of full and part-time ministry and going off and being appointed beyond the local church. The reason why a bunch of things are listed is we do have to pay attention that when you're appointed less than full-time, let me say if somebody was retiring at the end of this year after 7 years, and you were half-time, we would basically in the formula use 3.5 years, because that's a half of 7 years. And if somebody was three-quarter time, we get to use that wonderful fraction, but we're no longer going to be using the quarter time going forward. But if I did have somebody in the room who had been serving quarter time, they're not going to lose the 1/4 times their years that they had during these 7 years. So again, nothing was taken away. Any quarter-time pastors between 2007 and the end of this year got their credit, and again, it was multiplied times a quarter to figure out how many years that was. Also, sometimes we have people who don't go the entire calendar year, and for that, our computers apparently are excited enough to try to figure it out to the exact day, so they do that. But here's an example of a pastor retiring in the year 2020. So they've been full-time for my example, but here's how the formula works. There's 3 things multiplied times each other. The first thing is a factor, and the factor has been 1.25%. And that 1.25% is multiplied times the denominational average compensation in the year of retirement. It's not the DAC during the year that you earn the credit. It's going to be the DAC in the year that you come out for retirement. And the third thing it gets multiplied is time years. So I'm going to deal with somebody who's retiring in 2020, and I have got 2 different formulas I have to use. They're pretty similar, but at this point, even though they're retiring in the 2020, I have to cut off the number of years for this formula. It's 7 years. January 1st of 2007 through this December 31st is 7 years. If I go to a calculator, the way I multiply times 1.25% is I put in 0.0125. If this person's retiring in 2020, I don't have a crystal ball, but I knew how to make up an easy number so I could do the math. I made up a DAC fictitious of $80,000. So if that miraculously turns out to be the DAC in 2020, I've got my second number, and I've got my 7 years. I multiply those 3 things together, I come up with $7,500. That's $7,500 per year, but we pay benefits monthly, so I divide it by 12, and that's $625 per month. But I'm not done, because somebody's retiring in 2020, and they have another 7.5 years to go. Here's one of the biggest changes that General Conference made. The first factor that had been 1.25% is dropping to 1% for the years that you serve starting January 1st of next year going forward. So the 1% doesn't apply to your prior years, it's just 1% for the years 2014 going forward. If you don't have a whole lot of years, it's not a big change. If you have a lot of years to go, it is a big change, and for our denomination, this was the decision that was made in order to get this program to be sustainable for the long haul. That's a 20% drop in the formula to go from 1.25 down to 1%. And more about that. Since this is a big drop, what are you going to do about that? But here's how the formula works. It's 1% again times the DAC in the year of retirement, and you use the years starting 2014 going forward. How do you multiply times 1%? You put in 0.01. Same $80,000 hypothetical denominational average compensation. Times 7.5 years, that's $6,000. Divided by 12 months, $500 per month. So I add these two together, 625 plus 500. Now it should already be pretty stark to you because the 625 was for fewer years. That was for 7 years, and the 500 is for 7.5. So indeed, the years going forward from 2014 are going to have a formula that involves a smaller lifetime benefit. And there's a second thing that changed from General Conference. With respect to single and married people at the point of their retirement, our denomination for a long time, since 1982, would pay benefits that were pretty much the same between married and single people. That was especially true during the ministerial pension plan from 1982 until the end of 2006. But the way CRISP began is that the formula, that 1.25% formula, it carried with it that when somebody retired, a clergy person, if they were married, had built in an automatically pre-funded surviving spouse benefit equal to 70%. And again, sometimes this is hard to understand, but we have pension both in society and also pension within the church, where sometimes pension is payable not just for the life of the retiree, but pension that's also payable for a spouse who continues to live, if they do live, beyond the life of the retiree. It's called a surviving spouse benefit. And the insurance companies love to call it like joint and survivor spouse annuities. But this particular CRISP program had an automatic 70% going to a surviving spouse, and conferences have been paying for that all along. Starting in 2014 going forward, that 1% formula does not carry with it a built-in, already prepaid surviving spouse benefit for married clergy at the moment of retirement. So retiring clergy will have a decision to make. They got some of the years that come with this automatic 70% surviving spouse, but they then, if they're married, may have some years that don't have a surviving spouse built in. What do they want to do? So there will be options at the point of retirement. Not something you have to decide today, but our retirees at the moment that they retire will have forms to say, this piece, the $500 piece, would you like to also have a surviving spouse benefit to it? And the way they give that extra 70% surviving spouse benefit to it is they lowered the $500 to something to take into effect the age of the spouse. So maybe it drops down to $460 or $450 or something like that. So again, these were done in order to make sure that the program was sustainable, and there will be 2% built-in increases. 2% is relatively low. Sometimes we have retirees that prefer to have 3, 4, or 5% increases, and you can elect them at retirement. That's nothing new. But every time that there's sort of extra bells and whistles that you want to add at retirement, the benefit starts lower. And when I start to talk about the benefit access system, I highly encourage all of you that even though you get from our office quarterly statements, those quarterly statements that we send to you are mostly just account balances. What would be so much more meaningful to you is to get pension projections and to get a view of something called the readiness tool. And I'm going to show that to you before I step down. So the other thing that happens is I've been showing you examples where the clergy person not only was full-time, but I assumed that this person was retiring under the full retirement paragraph. This person had already turned 65 or they already had 40 years of service. What happens if that's not true? So I have a hypothetical. The hypothetical is I've got a 63-and-a-half-year-old who has 38 years of service. When somebody retires under the early retirement provisions, there is a reduction. And the reduction is not a penalty. The reduction is a way that Social Security and all pension organizations, when people do take their benefits early, to say, if a person lived an average life expectancy, what's the reduction supposed to be to make it all come out to be the way it's supposed to be, even, and not unfair? Because we're all in the pool together. Sometimes I run into people saying, what happens if I die early? Well, that's great, because the other people in the room who don't die until they're in their 90s or 100s, they've all said thank you to you along the way. Otherwise, we would have not had a very good pool for the way our benefits are paid. But somebody who's 63 and a half, 6% is the reduction per year, but just like Social Security, we look at the actual number of months. So 6% per year, when I divide it by 12 months, is 0.5%. Somebody's 63 and a half, that's 18 months short. 18 months times 0.5% is 9%. So when I was doing my calculation, 1.25 or 1% times the DAC times years, I've got one little thing that I have to do for an early retiree. And for a 63 and a half year old, I take a 9% reduction and give them 91% of whatever that formula called for. And that reduction is basically permanent. This person will keep getting 2% increases every year for as long as they live, but the reduction is done right there when the person retires early. This example is somebody who was 63 and a half with 38 years of service, but remember, you get to use whichever of the rules is more beneficial to you. What if this person had 39 years of service and they were still age 63 and a half? Social Security would not make any changes, but the way we do things in the church is, with 39 years of service, the person is just 1 year short. 1 year times 6% would be a 6% reduction. So instead of there being a 9% reduction, a 6% reduction, I do my formula, and then I give the person 94% of that amount. Any questions about how the reduction works? I definitely don't want you to think of it as a penalty. Sometimes we have people who say, I magically want to get to a special age. Sometimes it's more important to come out at the right time within your ministry and take the benefit that you're entitled to and not worry about the reduction. Okay. This is just a summary of the things that go with the formula. They have built-in 2% increases, but you can choose something other than 2%. The surviving spouse is 70% for those years that you earned between 2007 and 2013, but the credits starting in 2014, there aren't any built-in surviving spouse benefits. You have to take a reduction in order to make them available to your surviving spouse. So the other part of CRISP deals with an account. The account on all your statements has a beautiful set of letters that says CRSP-DC. And nobody has any idea what that is, but you have a CRSP-DC account, and it should have gotten some fancy name in our denomination, but we didn't run a contest, and so those are the initials that you're living with, the CRISP DC account. Started January 1st of 07. What's been going into it? 3% of your planned compensation for the year. Goes in, no questions asked. That's going to continue for the rest of this year. Starting January of next year, instead of it being 3%, no questions asked, it will be 2% automatically. And to get back to the 3%, you got to do something. You've got to participate in the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan and put in a minimum of 1% of your planned compensation. And if you do that, CRISP will match that 1%. This isn't my most helpful slide. I actually think this is the one that's more helpful, because here's what people are confused about. You're not being asked to contribute 1% to CRISP. My mom, who was a school teacher, retired in Illinois. When she used to make contributions in the 60s and 70s to the Illinois Teachers Retirement System, some of her contributions went to the good old state of Illinois to help pay for her pension. And then she herself also got to make 403B contributions. So here in the church, we're not saying that you as serving clergy have to put 1% into CRISP. You've got to put 1% into your own personal United Methodist, it's called the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan. And if you'll put in at least 1%, you'll get a 1% match. It's not very big, but in our denomination, we have had less than half of our clergy contributing anything. 0. So this is the carrot to try to make sure that people start to put money in, but you know what? 1%, and to get the match, while that's still not giving you very much money, by churches having learned how to fill out agreement forms and to put money out of the salary into the pastor's own personal investment plan to sign up for this, the fact that the formula is going to provide a smaller benefit going forward, how are you going to help yourself to have an adequate pension? One of the ways to do that is to put more skin in the game when we've had so many of our clergy putting in absolutely 0. For those of you who are already contributing, that's great. And you don't have to put in an additional 1% on top of what you're already doing. Those of you who are already contributing, you're doing fine. But you may still want to put more money into the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan because the formula for the other part of CRISP is going to give you a lower benefit. But you already know at least how to put the money in, and you've already worked with your treasurer and worked with your W-2s to know how all of that stuff works. Now, these before and after tax contributions have been around for a long time. I do want you to hear what the word rollover is before I move on, because the word rollover is a critical word that doesn't have anything to do with distributions. A rollover is money that comes out of a pension program and moves directly into another pension program without touching you. It's not you getting a distribution, it's just changing the bucket where the pension's going from this account to this other pension account. That's called a rollover. The United Methodist Personal Investment Plan has been the receiving bucket and the send-out bucket anytime you want to do rollovers. And this is going to be critical to understand that this is the account where rollovers happen, because when I get to the ministerial pension plan, at retirement, you're going to have something new that you have to do. So it's the personal investment plan, UMPIP, that has the rollover capability. And if you happen to have had a prior career, you can move money into this program. If you have an IRA, you can put it into this program as a rollover. Just, you cannot put in Roth IRAs, not because the law prohibits that from happening, but because our computers are not capable of doing it, and it's an unbelievable amount of work that your denomination would not be well served to try to pull this off and to make sure we don't mess up your monies when they come back. So if you have a Roth IRA, bless you, that's fantastic. Don't try to give it to us. We'll do everything I can to make it, our office will do everything it can to make sure that you don't make that mistake. So we can take rollovers, and at other times you can also move the money back out. This is a very important form. I forgot to grab them, Trudy, so they're probably, oh, you've got them. Thank you, Trudy, for anticipating after 4 meetings out in the field. We've got some sample before and after tax contribution agreement forms. We brought some with us today. For those of you who are only hearing this through the recorded version of this, there's going to be a link to it, but we've always been able to get to these forms by going to the website of the General Board, going to resources, and going to forms. It's the second form that's listed, the before and after tax form, that you can download, and when you download it, it's even sort of a neat PDF that you can pre-fill in by typing. But here's the physical form for anyone who's never seen it before. This is a form that sometimes clergy do fill them out at charge conference time, but I want you to hear this very clearly. It has always been true, well, I shouldn't say always because it wasn't true in the early 70s. It has almost always been true that you can change how much money you're putting into the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan anytime during the calendar year. You can increase how much you're contributing, you can decrease, you can stop, you can start at any time. And this is not a charge conference required event. It is something where people do change it, and there are things that charge conference does require, other things like housing allowance, and when you do your benefit election for your flexible spending accounts, those are one-time only events. But how much you are contributing to the personal investment plan is something you can change at any time. And just to make sure that Nate is awake, Nate, when is it that they do have to have a charge conference?
You have to have a charge conference anytime the bottom line of your pastoral support form is increased. So if you're just moving money around, if you decide you want to make a contribution to the personal investment plan, you can do that. We're going to see you actually, whenever we get to healthcare reform, you can change your family coverage if you are currently under Health Flex with family and you want to change that. You can do all of that as long as the bottom line of your pastoral support form stays the same. That's what has to be approved by charge conference. Otherwise, you don't have to have a charge conference.
Thanks, Nate. I knew he could answer that because he has said that every time we've met. How much can you contribute? A lot of money. Many of you remember these limits used to be a bit lower, $9,500 for lots and lots of years. For 2013, to do it on a pre-tax basis, it's gone all the way up to $17,500. And for those of you who are 50 or older, you get to add a catch-up amount of $5,500. Those two together are already $23,000. If that's not enough of a limit for you, if you have served the denomination for 15 years or longer, 15 years, then after that you can actually put in another $3,000. But you have to keep track of that because that $3,000 catch-up can never go more than $15,000 over your lifetime. And I'll never run into people normally who've got that much money to set aside, but if I had somebody who was that curious, I want you to know you can afford an accountant. And especially you yourself should get a copy of Publication 571 from the IRS, because that goes into this special rule about people who have served more than 15 years. The other thing that's important to know is in that IRS Publication 571 and also in an IRS Publication 517, there's something that is true and very quirky about the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan that even many accountants don't know the rule. And this is something that's critical about understanding pre-tax contributions. My wife being clergy and me being a lay person, if each of us put money into the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan out of our salary, for both of us, we're going to be saving federal income tax. But as a lay worker, if I am putting money into the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan, I have to take my contributions to the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan. They didn't show up in box 1 of my W-2, but box 3 of my W-2 that shows the Social Security earnings that I have, they add that number back. And I have to pay my 7.65% times my salary and adding these contributions back to it. That's what lay people do. And it happens just automatically with your W-2. Clergy do not. Now, the first thing that's a little bit strange about this is if you're looking at your W-2 for clergy, box 3 should always be empty because churches never deal with Social Security. By definition, you're self-employed. Doesn't mean you are self-employed, but by definition, you're self-employed for Social Security purposes and pay SECA tax. How much is that? I know I don't have any sympathy as a lay person because I only pay half of it. You get, just like my wife, the honor and privilege of paying 15.3%. But when you're putting money into the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan, you save federal income tax and you save this 15.3% SECA, Social Security tax. And again, a lot of accountants get this wrong. And if they don't believe you, have them look this up in Publication 571 or Publication 517. 517 is the one that deals more with Social Security. 571 that deals with 403B contributions to church plans like this. So when people come up to me and say, should I be putting money in on a before tax or an after tax basis, I will say to them, do you know how unbelievably powerful it is to put in money on a pre-tax basis? If you're going to save Social Security tax, 15.3 on top of the federal tax, wouldn't it be pretty neat to be able to save 30 or 40 cents on every dollar right away? You can't even do that with a Roth IRA. And as clergy, sometimes you're able to take this money out as a housing allowance. The only people who don't get to take housing allowance on all of it are those of you who have a very, very, very long career. So it's extremely attractive to put this money on a pre-tax basis, and it's very rare a financial planner would ever say, maybe after tax is the way to go. And that's one of the questions that you're being asked on the form. Do you want to send the money in pre-tax or after tax? And your treasurer who fills out your W-2 needs to understand what to do to make sure that the number doesn't show up in box 1 and knows how to put the special notes in box 14. When does the money come out? The money can come out at retirement, but it also, for the personal investment plan, can come out earlier. It can always come out at age 59 and a half. You don't have to be retired. Even before age 59, there are a couple other provisions dealing with hardship. We have hardship loans and hardship withdrawals. There are 3 what are called safe harbor rules for when the money can come out for hardship. These are for unreimbursed medical expenses, to pay for educational tuition for you, your spouse, children. And the third one is the one that most often is used by clergy, which is to purchase a primary or secondary residence. So even though these are called hardship provisions, that's just the term that's in the tax code. But these are the only 3 reasons for which you can take a withdrawal without yet turning age 59 and a half. Unreimbursed medical, tuition payments for you or your family, or to purchase a primary or secondary residence. If you become incapacitated, yes, a question. I'll repeat the question, but we would like to actually have you recorded. So why don't you ask your question again?
For the hardship loans, just with my colleagues, that's an experience I've had related to a mortgage payment, and have found it very, very helpful because you're paying yourself back the interest instead of paying a bank. So I would advocate for that experience if people are interested in it. Setting the percentage rate of the payback, do you all set that annually according to the market? Do you fluctuate throughout the year according to the market?
So I have a question and a useful comment, which I'll even go further on. We usually don't cover too much about loans and this kind of situation because it's not a thing that's changed. But loans, a couple things to understand. First of all, the interest rate is not really all that attractive when we're dealing with homes, because what the interest rate is, it's set every month, and it is looking at what the prime lending rate is, and we add to it 2%. So while I believe the prime is 3 1/4, the lending rate would be 5 1/4. But you mentioned something that was sort of important to hear. Not all loan programs against pension have the interest payable back to yourself. There are many pension programs in this country where when you pay the loan back, the interest goes to everybody, not just to you yourself. But the way the United Methodist Church does this is that 5 1/4 interest rate that you're paying is part of the interest that you pay back into your own account. The other thing you have to be a little careful about is even though you may be borrowing the money in order to deal with the down payment or to help defray the cost of buying a primary or secondary house, and even though it is nice that the interest rate is going back into your account, that interest is never deductible. So even though it's for a house, you just have to be very careful that you understand you get to deduct a traditional mortgage, but no borrowing against a pension program is ever deductible against on your Schedule A for that. So I'm going to close at the end to talk about Ernst & Young, but anyone who's contemplating getting a loan against this program, all of these caveats and all these things are covered by them. And it's an important tool for you to understand that makes it possible. But the loan for some people is a big saving grace because taking the money out while you're still working and you don't get to use the housing allowance means that if you were taking the down payment out as a distribution, it would be unbelievably taxable. And so that's the reason why so many of your colleagues have thought of and talked about this loan. It can be very helpful. But it's usually better if somebody contemplates that they're going to do it and put some extra money into their personal investment plan. So if you didn't get any other message this afternoon, you're going to have lots of incentives of reasons why you should start to participate or why you should increase how much money you're putting into the personal investment plan. When the money comes out at the times we talked about, the church has been unbelievably generous because there are no fees anytime you want to get a check. And it's not the thing at retirement that's once and done. When you're taking money out of your account, you can change this throughout your retirement. You can start setting up installment payments of $200 per month and say, that's not enough, I need to be taking out more, or I need to be taking out less. It used to be true that you could only change your mind every quarter. Now the church says you can get even multiple checks in the same month, and again with no fees. So the money comes out. Remember, you have to deal with tax issues, and it does take a little while for the processing to take place because monies are being sold in the market in order for a check to come to you. So we are not a bank type of relationship, but there's unbelievably high flexibility about your money coming out. But because of such high flexibility, here's the one thing that we were not taught in society, how to handle things in retirement. When my father as a clergy person retired in the 1980s, all of his accounts got turned into lifetime pension. He made his decisions. It was a one and done. He finished them. He got lifetime benefits, and when he died, my mom now is getting her surviving spouse benefits. Almost all of you in this room are going to have accounts that will be open at retirement. They're not open for contributions, but they're open with two responsibilities that you have to manage. How are you going to invest it, and how are you going to take out money in order to try that last a very long time? And you can't leave the money sitting on account forever. There's also some IRS rules about taking required minimum distributions. So partly in anticipation of the fact that this is a very difficult thing for our retired lay and clergy and missionaries to do within our denomination, but also because of something I'm going to talk about, the ministerial pension plan, there's something new called the Life Stage Retirement Income Service. It began January of this year. Those of you who read your HARC articles, it was announced there, but until you get up to retirement, it may not be something that you pay too much attention to. So I want to tell you a little bit about it, because every once in a while, we as a denomination are quite dramatic leaders within our country. Very few corporations have ever put such a thing in place, but we're trying to help you have an alternative about how to go on automatic pilot where your money is invested for you and you're given a sum of money to say this is what you can take out every month with the expectation, no promise, but an expectation that it'll last a lifetime. And it's not a fixed amount. It's supposed to stay in effect for the rest of the calendar year, and then starting January the following year, you'll be able to get an inflation increase. But because these are accounts, the accounts can go up and down with the markets. So the service includes with it a notice that you will get, usually sometime around Thanksgiving, that will tell you, here's what your inflation increase is for the next year, and as long as you're in the safety zone, there's a safety zone that's pretty wide, where it has a recommended amount, and as long as you're still within the safety zone, go ahead and take inflation for the next year. But if you hit a guardrail on the negative side, the correspondence is going to say, you better not take the inflation. And you hit the guardrail too hard, it's going to say, well, even if you try to stay at the number that you've been taking, there's a chance your money will last not as long as you do. You're going to basically have this account go down to zero, and you'll have to live on your other forms of benefits that you have, both in the church and Social Security, because this account is very likely to disappear before your life expectancy. So it can happen on the other side, that the investments turn out so well that you can not only give yourself inflation, but you can give yourself like a pay raise in retirement, expect it to last the whole rest of your life. So the way that this program works is, one of the first things that it does, I better find out what that screen was. It's got something important in it, and I'll get to the ministerial pension plan later, but here's something that General Conference had already as a rule, but it's making it fixed. The ministerial pension plan is a sum of money that, when it was first designed in the 1980s, the only thing that you could do with that money was to convert it into a lifetime pension, which is called annuitizing. And for people who, like my father, who retired in the 1980s, this was their only choice. They took the ministerial pension plan and they annuitized it, all of it. Lots of variations how to do it, but there was only one choice about how much to annuitize, 100%. General conferences played with the range of that account that could be annuitized. And so for the rest of this year, 2013, the people who retired this year or any time in the past could annuitize anywhere from 65% all the way up to 100%. So for some of our clergy, they wanted to be able to take their entire account balance in the ministerial pension plan and have all of it as a lifetime pension. There's roughly about $4 billion worth of ministerial pension plan money that's not yet had the people like you who have not yet come up to retirement, and so you're not yet ready to make your decisions about annuities. But once the money does get annuitized, it's not insurance companies that hold the liability, it's we as a denomination, and more specifically, it's we as annual conferences hold the liability. So what General Conference did was it said 65% and 35%, we're going to make these two separate pieces of the ministerial pension plan. At retirement, you will annuitize 65% of it, and the other 35%, you won't lose the account, but you yourself are going to become responsible for that account. And this is where, again, that word I used, rollover, the thing that almost all of you want to and need to do is to roll that 35% and put it someplace. Usually the safest and quickest and fastest place to put it is to move it from the ministerial pension plan and roll it over into your United Methodist personal investment account. That's the plan that you have that takes rollovers. Once that 35% has gone in there, you now have complete control over it. You can take it out as fast and slow as you want to, and if you don't want it to be in that account, you can always roll it over into an IRA or some other institution outside the United Methodist Church. But people very often roll it over into the account because it preserves the investments, the social responsible investing, and it preserves the housing allowance exclusion. So very often, that's not only the first thing people do, it's the only thing they do. They roll that 35% and put it into the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan. That's a large sum of money. And so even if today you have very little money in your United Methodist Personal Investment Plan, when you retire, you're going to potentially move 35% from the ministerial pension plan and roll it over into your personal account. So it's already something that we're not taught in society about how to manage money in retirement, and you're going to have an even bigger responsibility because you'll have even more money than you ever thought that you're going to have to invest and take out, which is why this life stage retirement income program got created. Here's how this little service works. You can't see it very clearly, but the first box has the word consolidate. And what it means to consolidate is the Life Stage Retirement Income Program works specifically with the United Methodist Personal Investment Plan, but you can have money in CRISP, that 3% account, and you can also have this 35% that will become available at retirement that needs to be rolled over into your personal investment plan. That's what we're talking about consolidating, sticking all that money into the personal investment plan. And the second step has to deal with, there's a little icon of a lockbox. This little lockbox was a pretty neat feature that the consultants who helped us to create this, and Ernst & Young, the financial planners, that is one of the things we'll talk about as a service available to you, liked that we created, is that people can come up to retirement and they understand that they're going to have a very serious sum of money that they have to invest and figure out distributions for. But if you don't have a good emergency fund and realize that things can change with respect to your retirement years, unforeseen things, things that are different from your early years of retirement, from later years of retirement, what happens if you need some money out of your account? Well, you can be on an automatic pilot to get out a certain sum of money, but the moment that you need an extra check, everything gets recalculated. And for those of you who are trying to plan how you're going to get regular monthly income year after year with a little bit of inflation, if you needed to take out a sum of money, everything gets thrown out of whack. But not if you set aside some money in a lockbox. So here, this huge sum of money, because this person had a lot of money in the ministerial pension plan, $758 was the recommended dollar amount per month, but this person wanted to have some money set aside. They set aside $48,000, and now the recommendation is to receive $610. They can still go get more money out of this lockbox anytime they want to, but I think this is going to be a very highly chosen feature for those of you who go into life stage at retirement. So I've already said this before, but the last part of the pension program that changed is changes to the Ministerial Pension Plan, MPP. It had been an optional element that's somewhere between 65% all the way up to 100, starting for any retiree. It's not a decision that you have to make just because January 1st, 2014 comes along, but at retirement, you're going to need to make decisions about the 65% of MPP that must be annuitized, and then you have to roll over that other 35% to figure out where to put it. And here's some examples for the ministerial pension plan. Our annuities within the church are always paid a certain sum of money to the clergy person, and when the clergy person dies, it gets payable to the surviving spouse, depending on what was elected. We've got today all of these options. I should put it differently. We have a weird option of 75% and 50. 50 and 75% are going away next year, and the three options in 2014 are going to be 100%, 85, and 70. And I also think that next year 85% will be an attractive one that people want, because 70% may not be enough for the spouse to live on, especially when the housing allowance exclusion, the surviving spouse, my wife being clergy, if she were to die, I get some of her pension within the United Methodist Church, but I would have to pay taxes on all of it, because only when she's living do we get to use a housing allowance exclusion to avoid paying taxes on some of her pension. So I think this is going to be something that would be important to add. Sometimes 100% is just too much. And we've got 3 single life benefits. I want to end here with a little bit of an instruction about how to get to the benefit access system. Many of you did use the prior system that our office had. It was called the, thank you, it was called OASIS. OA standard for Online Access. You can tell it's Friday, can't you? It was the Online Access System. That was a useful system, but it was pretty hard to use. And the one thing that people did was when they lost their PIN numbers, no one on our staff would ever tell them what their new PIN number was. And even today, if you want a PIN number, we won't tell you. We'll just create a new one for you and physically mail it to you. The new benefit access system will let you set up a username, and you can use any username that some other clergy didn't beat you to it, and you create a password for yourself. But during the sign-up process, we're going to ask you to create and give to us your email address. We're not going to be using that email address, probably not for a long time into the future before we push anything out to you, but the email may be very critical to you, that if you lose your password or if you lose your username, if we've got this email, we can get things back to you and you'll be right up and running very quickly. Please do not give us an email that is anything other than personal. Don't send it to pastor@FUMC or at CUMC, Christ United Methodist Church, or what have you. Get a personal email and let that be the email that you use on the system. We're not going to send private information out, but we also don't want to send how to get back into your system for passwords and for your username. What's neat about this new little portal is it creates a notebook for you that's your specific information. And this is where you get pension projections, your beneficiary designations. You can go green and get us to stop mailing you anything. We'll just send you an email telling you that your new statement of account is out there and you can go get it whenever you want to. And you can shred all your old ones and know that you can get somewhere from 5 to 10 years worth of old documents. But the other thing that's out there is this very crafty readiness tool, which puts together not only your retirement income but also Social Security. and it tries to use a beginning peg of 85% of your planned compensation. You can change that. You can change all kinds of other things, including the year that you think you're going to retire and how much money you're putting into the personal contributions program. And these little sliders, you just simply move them across and the numbers change immediately. It's a very helpful, interactive tool that you can use to try to deal with readiness for retirement. And the other thing that is here is there's lots of resources, and there's some electronic learning about investments and other programs that we have in our United Methodist Church. So I encourage all of you to be able to get out to the out to the benefit access system. There's a sheet that was passed out, or that you picked up, that also talked about Ernst & Young. You can always get this information, for those of you who are listening with the recorded version of this, by going to the front home page of the General Board of Pension and Health Benefits and clicking on Ernst & Young. But Ernst & Young is a very large consulting company that does not sell any product, but has partnered with us to provide clergy and their families free financial planning. So if you've got money in one of our United Methodist programs, you have access to this account, to this service, and it's free. It used to be limited to 3 hours. It used to be have a cost to it. It turns out to be completely free now. It's something that you can use to deal with retirement planning, for estate planning, dealing with taxes. It will not just deal with United Methodist benefits, which they know very well, and United Methodist taxes. They also deal with any spousal situations, or if you yourself have prior employment, they'll look at all of your insurance and all of your investments and help you with them. So since they don't have any product to give you, for those of you who already do have a financial planner, sometimes these are perfect people to get a second opinion from, to make sure that the advice that you're giving makes sense for who you are within the tax code and with respect to being United Methodist clergy or their families. You can call their 800 number. We will never know that you did this, but the only way that they know who you are and that you're eligible for the service is you have to give them your Social Security number. So just make sure you call the right toll-free number, and then give them your Social Security number, and they'll know who you are. And if you do go onto the benefit access system, you can give to Ernst & Young the ability to look up your account on the benefit access system, and the two of you can be looking at the same screens at the same time and get all kinds of advice about that. And again, you can always take it or get rid of it. When you give permission, it's not permanent. You can always take it away from them. So this is our toll-free number if you want to get a hold of our customer service department and our website. And you saw on a previous screen how you get a hold of benefit access. So we have done this before. We're about to give you an 8-minute break. It's roughly 2:45. We think you're coming back in 8 minutes. Nate is going to start in 10 minutes. But be close, because after 8 minutes, he's going to start to call you back. Thank you, and if you got any questions...